Located just outside Tokyo in the Chiba prefecture of Japan lies Tokyo DisneySea, a theme park known by many as one of the best in the world. Scattered throughout the park's many ports of call are attractions both operating and now defunct, which are filled with impressive technology, rich storytelling, history, and facts. We felt many of these were worth sharing from both our most popular and lesser known videos to provide you with the ultimate tour of Tokyo DisneySea's incredible attractions. When the Tower of Terror dropped into the scene at Tokyo DisneySea in 2006, the iconic Twilight Zone theme was nowhere to be seen, and a new original story now accompanied the attraction based around an old cursed hotel in downtown New York, a wealthy adventurer, and a secret society that spans multiple Disney attractions around the world, which is essentially the Disney theme park's equivalent to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Though due to this park presenting the story almost exclusively in Japanese, many will unfortunately miss the in-depth story and minute details that makes this such an amazing attraction to experience. So join us on a guided tour of the Hotel Hightower back in 1899, where we reveal the story, secrets, and behind-the-scenes details of Tokyo DisneySea's Tower of Terror. But first, let's address the elephant in the room, the removal of the Twilight Zone theme from the attraction. This was a necessity for the ride to go ahead, as the Japanese guests that frequent Tokyo DisneySea have very little knowledge about the franchise, though it presented a challenge to the Imagineers in deciding what to theme the attraction around. Eventually, they settled on an original story for the attraction, playing off the established Society of Explorers and Adventurers characters which were already established around Tokyo DisneySea. We've also touched on this in an earlier video which you can watch here. The show building cleverly recycled much of the layout and structure from the Californian version of the attraction, meaning that research and development could be focused on the interior theming and exterior architecture, which was heavily influenced by its placement within the American waterfront port of call at Tokyo DisneySea. The hotel's design is based around Gothic Revival and Neo-Moorish architectural stylings, popular with American architects during the 19th and early 20th centuries, in which the attraction's history takes place. The signature T-shape that all the towers support is actually a consequence of the immense school bus-sized generators which sit atop each elevator shaft and run the tower mechanisms. Interestingly, the ride portion itself barely takes up more than 20% of the actual ride building, but an immense footprint and structure is required to support it. Behind the shaft on the same level that guests queue and load are a bunch of facilities out of view for cast members to use, meaning that no space in the building is left unutilized. Tokyo DisneySea's Tower of Terror opened to the public on September 22nd, 2006. The story starts in the queue, where guests find that the Hotel Hightower has been reopened by the New York Preservation Society, hoping to showcase the incredible history of the building and the assortment of artifacts which Hightower had collected. Rumors through newspaper cutouts and propaganda regarding Hightower's demise in the hotel and the possibility that it's haunted can be seen around the exterior of the attraction. Yet the Society merely plays this off as superstition and nonsense, and believes that Harrison was merely the victim of early elevator technology mishaps. As soon as we enter the lobby of Hotel Hightower, we are introduced to our main character Harrison Hightower III. Fresco paintings above the queue give us a glimpse into Hightower's personality, hobbies, and self-centered attitude. Each painting features Harrison assuming a stoic and heroic pose with his back turned to many dangerous situations, showing an utter disregard for his and others' lives. Harrison Hightower III was a collector of cultural antiques. Accompanied by his valet, Mr. Smedling, he traveled to every continent to collect his curiosities. Once he found an artifact he wanted, he would use any method available to acquire it, including, on occasion, outright plunder. Harrison Hightower may look familiar to some Disney fanatics, and that is because his likeness is based around legendary Imagineer Joe Rohde, who even portrays the character in the photographs and live-action portions of the attraction. The lobby that guests enter is ornate and well preserved, giving a glimpse into the history of the building. But in plain view at the end of the lobby is an ominous old elevator shaft which lays in utter disrepair. The doors are warped and the frayed remains of the shaft's cable dangle freely. In plain view, you can see the damage and remains of the shaft which took Harrison Hightower's life. It starts the ominous foreboding which will permeate the attraction as you continue through. The exterior facade holds an interesting secret about this shaft. From the outside, there are 4 elevator shafts, but only 3 of them actually serve a purpose within the attraction, being used by the ride's vehicles. The shaft second from the right is actually just part of the theming, and vertically matches up perfectly with the lobby and Hightower's private suite at the pinnacle. Once guests go past this shaft, they leave the lobby behind the front desk and into a small room before the pre-show which is filled with images portraying Hightower. It is here that guests are given a brief spiel from the Preservation Society, introducing Hightower and providing more information about his last ever expedition involving the theft of the idol. Guests are then ushered into one of 2 pre-show rooms. It is within this room that we are given our first glimpse at the cursed idol known as Shiriki Utandu. It is sitting lifeless on a podium near a stained glass window showcasing Harrison Hightower appearing proud. This idol has a significant backstory that helps provide context as to where it came from and its intentions. Hightower was on an unsuccessful expedition with his assistant Mr. Smedlin in the uncharted parts of Africa when he came into the care of a tribe that possessed the idol as its guardian totem. Hightower became infatuated with the relic and offered to buy it, but the tribe refused. Eventually, after many frustrating bargains, Hightower rallied his men who were with him and stole the relic by force. But the tribe's members just stood around staring at him, offering no resistance to them stealing their idol. When he returned to America on December 31st, 1899, he held a large unveiling which revealed the idol to the public and paraded around as his bombastic self giving heroic depictions of his adventure. The party was a success and many attended, but Hightower left early to find a place in his penthouse for Shiriki Utandu. As he boarded the elevator to his penthouse, Mr. Smedlin warned him to give the idol respect, but Hightower refused and in an obvious act of defiance, smothered a cigar on the idol's head. As the clock struck midnight, all lights in the hotel went out, and the party was plunged into darkness. Those outside the hotel witnessed an intense green light bursting out from Hightower's room, and thousands of volts of green lightning arced across the entire building, shattering glass and hurling debris onto onlookers below, and starting small fires across the hotel. Many heard the screams of Hightower, but when they went back to investigate, he was nowhere to be seen. At the base of the central elevator shaft lay a shattered and deformed elevator, and all that remained inside was the idol. Back in the pre-show room, a member of the Preservation Society then gives a brief spiel before winding up a gramophone featuring the final ever interview with Hightower himself. This goes on normally for a short period of time until the room is plunged into darkness and Hightower begins speaking to the guests directly, warning them about the idol, and talking about the fateful events of his night in the elevator, whilst transforming the stained glass mural to showcase everything. The show ends after the stained glass mural quickly shatters at the base of the hotel, where Hightower's elevator crashed, and the idol comes to life, looks at the guests, sneers at them, and disappears in a small dazzling flash of light. Whilst an impressive effect that almost always gets a reaction from the crowd, the mechanism is rather simple. In the brief moment that the lights dim, the idol is plunged into the stand beneath it at faster than freefall speeds. After the idol disappears, guests are then ushered into the vault or boiler room. The boiler room is themed as a secret vault which houses hundreds of Hightower's rare and valuable possessions that were previously hidden away from visitors and guests. Each artifact tells its own story, but if you pay close attention to the suspended artifact towards the back of the room, You'll catch a glimpse of the glowing green eyes of Shiriki Utandu staring back at you every now and then. The enormous vault acts as another queue that splits guests into their boarding groups for the attraction. The vault is split into a downstairs and an upstairs level. The purpose of this is to allow one level to load whilst the other is going through the ride profile, creating a seamless boarding experience that doesn't rely on having to have the shaft emptied before cycling with new guests. It also adds to the illusion that whilst you see people entering, you never see them leaving. After a brief safety spiel, it's time to get seated for your private tour of Hotel Hightower. As the usher closes the doors behind you, there is a violent flash of light before plunging guests into darkness, and as the elevator begins to reverse towards the shaft, the ghost of Hightower is warning the guest about the significance of the idol. In the top left corner of the room, the piercing green eyes of the idol can be seen, and taunting laughter is heard. The mechanics of this ride are physically identical to that found at Paris in California, with guests loading into an elevator which acts as merely a vessel for the riders. This vessel is pushed away from the door on wheels and towards the ride show shaft, where it is locked into an actual elevator and the experience begins. As the elevator rises, guests will find themselves in the private penthouse suite of Harrison Hightower. Past a hallway from Hightower's bedroom sits the idol on a pedestal, which the ghost of Hightower then emerges to interact with. Hightower takes a cocky stance, but is stunned as the idol begins to charge, zapping him with powerful green energy into the elevator shaft behind them and plunging him out of view, likely recreating the night that Hightower disappeared. The room begins to fade as stars appear to fill the view, and the idol slowly turns towards the guests, and its snickering can be heard. The ghostly effect in this room is actually a Pepper's Ghost effect, a famous effect used in many Disney attractions. The hallway extends normally outwards from the guests with some forced perspective to make it appear slightly larger than it is, though in the center of the room is a glass pane at a 45-degree angle, which if you look closely, you can see it on the ground. In an unseen room off to the side, the ghost effect is rear-projected onto a scrim, which is then reflected by the mirror pane. The elevator at the end of the room is also rear-projected on a scrim. The walls around the room aren't actually solid, but are a fabric filled with fiber optics that allow light to shine through it when they're no longer illuminated. This also appears to be the final resting location of the spirit of the idol in Hightower, which has cursed the building, as the windows in the back of this scene match perfectly with the portion of the exterior building above the destroyed and unused elevator shaft. This is also helped by the fact that at night, you can see the same green lightning shooting out of this suite towards the drop shaft, which triggers the elevator within it to fall. To the guests on the ride, this merely appears as green flashes of light, but from the outside, there is an intense lightning effect sweeping the building. The effect at first from a distance may appear random, but it is synchronized with the drops in the tower. Guests then begin to rise above the penthouse, further giving to the illusion of its cursed nature, to another room which opens to reveal just an ornate glass mirror. The guests in the mirror are then distorted in a green glow where the idol appears and causes the guests in the mirror to disappear, in a similar fate to Harrison Hightower. In a flash, the idol then lunges at the guests and the drop sequence begins. Though many recognize the drop sequence on this version of the attraction to be much more relaxed than the others around the world, and there is a real reason for this. In most of the other drop sequences worldwide, the attraction starts with a sheer drop after the catalyst event, in this case being the idol lunging at you. Though in the Tokyo version, it actually jolts upwards and rises instead of performing an initial drop like the other versions. Comparably, this does make for a less thrilling experience. Though once you reach the top of the shaft, guests get to experience a spectacular view of Tokyo DisneySea before being zapped by the cursed green lightning and sent plunging down the shaft. The elevator will bounce vertically around the shaft for a few movements before performing a final large drop. At the end of the drop, the elevator will return to its load-in level, now filled with stars and the glowing green eyes of Shiriki Utandu. The stars and eyes slowly fade as the normal shaft comes back into view. The door at the end of the hall opens, and guests exit the attraction. Guests will exit through a gift shop that is part of the bathhouses of Hotel Hightower, and features incredibly over-the-top murals depicting Hightower as essentially a god. There is also one of him enjoying the baths. Imagineers achieved a great feat by successfully separating the Twilight Zone from the Tower of Terror to add an original, engaging story that still possesses the same ominous feeling that the original attraction contains. Even though many regard the drop sequence to be far more tame than others, a lot of Disney theme park fans will still recognize this version as being one of the best iterations of Tower of Terror.
Tokyo DisneySea is arguably the best theme park in the world, and the best theme park deserves the best rides. Upon opening, there was one attraction that stood out as a shining beacon on top of an already glowing park. Journey to the Center of the Earth is the perfect summation of everything Imagineering excels in, from an in-depth world built through an incredible story, to a creative use of a ride system, through to one of the most incredible animatronics anywhere in the world. However, due to this attraction being presented in Japanese, some guests may miss the detailed setup, building, and climax of the storyline that makes this one of the best attractions in the world. Before we can journey to the core of the Earth though, we must venture through the entrance port of the park that calls the attraction home. What else can be said about Tokyo DisneySea that we haven't already praised it for before on the channel? DisneySea is the epitome of what Imagineers' most creative and talented minds can do when pesky budget cuts don't get in the way. A park that almost 20 years after opening is still the gold standard for themed entertainment design. One aspect of the park serves as a beacon for all travelers: the 189-foot tall Mount Prometheus, a towering volcano visible from all sections of the park. Erupting with flames, DisneySea's icon draws you into another world, the world of Mysterious Island. Inside the caldera of the volcano, accessible only through a subterranean tunnel system, is one of the world's best themed lands, a hidden sea base home to Captain Nemo, with constant erupting geysers and bubbling waters, adding beautiful levels of kinetics to the land. Whilst Disney had toyed with Jules Verne's stories and creations before, especially in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, as well as Discoveryland at Disneyland Paris, Tokyo DisneySea would be the first time a land would be fully themed around the author's body of work, with even the land itself being named after one of Verne's most well-known novels. Imagineer Tom Thor Thordarson was given free rein with the project, handed over a blank slate, and told to simply design a ride themed to Jules Verne's famous novel, and design a spectacular, one-of-a-kind attraction he did. Journey to the Center of the Earth opened with the world's best theme park, Tokyo DisneySea, on the 4th of September, 2001. Inside the subterranean tunnel system that leads you into Mysterious Island is the entrance to your incredible journey. Drawing you in is the attraction signage, pulsating with flowing, glowing magma, and noting that the attraction is sponsored by a life insurance company. But hopefully, that won't become relevant to our journey. The queue takes you through countless caves and caverns, and if you turn around just before you enter, you will notice two massive drill bits marking the place where Captain Nemo first discovered these cavernous pathways. The first section of the queue takes you through the Magma Sanctum, where active fissures in the earth are alive with volcanic activity, billowing out smoke. Next, you walk past one of Captain Nemo's pressurized biological laboratories, filled with details and references to what you're about to experience on your journey. The location is clearly an active laboratory, which feels like you just missed Captain Nemo working on one of his experiments, with the room filled with scientific equipment and highly technological drawings. Keen eyes will notice picture frames on the wall displaying some locations you are about to visit on your underground sightseeing exploration, from the crystal caverns to the mushroom forest. But Nemo also talks of a collection of fossilized eggs that he is studying that seem to point to a brand new, yet undiscovered species of animals. But this is just one of Captain Nemo's labs, and to enjoy the subterranean journey, you need to head subterranean. This is achieved through the Terravator, a high-tech elevator designed to take groups of passengers over half a mile below the Earth's surface, home to Nemo's base station, as well as the loading platform for your specialized vehicles. As you step into the Terravator, lights, sound, and movement help sell the effect that you are truly traveling at high speeds deep below the Earth. Exiting the Terravator, you step foot onto a long ramp, twisting around towards the boarding platform. But be careful not to look down, as below your ramp is a bottomless pit. This underground laboratory is designed to monitor seismic activity, and as long as the lights are flashing green, all is good. Unfortunately, you arrive at a completely unmanned communication center, with the cavern being ominously lit by a flashing red beacon. It's here in this deserted laboratory, half a mile underground, that you board your ride vehicle, an excavation cart able to hold 6 guests across 3 rows, with the ride system being the 3rd generation version of the slot car ride system, after the Indiana Jones adventure and test track had proved its effectiveness. This time, the ride system would be utilized to tell a true story, and mostly hidden from guests' eyes, due to the lighting and audience focus on the attraction. Your experience on the ride itself starts out calmly in the Rainbow Caverns, where glowing crystals of infinite colors give you a glimpse at the magic that is stored under the Earth's crust. Through the clever use of forced perspective, optical illusions that trick our eyes into thinking something is bigger or smaller than it actually is, the caverns appear to be endless, as we glide along the swirling path, admiring the beauty. Before long, the gemstones give way to a bioluminescent mushroom forest, filled with otherworldly flora and fauna, including giant mushrooms, as well as strange, frog-like creatures, all emanating a natural glow, lighting up the cavern. It is next, though, that the attraction turns from a leisurely, sightseeing excursion to a more high-intensity attraction, as a cave in front of us collapses due to an earthquake, instantly changing the path of your journey. On this new route is where you discover a nest filled with egg sacs, perhaps of the same species Captain Nemo was researching in his fossilized discovery in the queue. Your brain barely has time to process this, though, as you race and swerve out of the cavern and onto the shore of a subterranean sea, caught in a constant state of an electrifying storm. Lightning strikes all throughout the scene, and at one stage barely misses your ride vehicle, sending it fleeing right into the jaws of the ride's most surprising element. Racing through caverns, your ride vehicles avoid billowing lava and a fireball, only to come face to face with a gigantic lava monster, perhaps the mother of the mysterious eggs and one of the most impressive animatronics in the world. The lava monster, nicknamed Hortense by the Imagineers, unsurprisingly isn't happy that you have disturbed her nest, roaring at the ride vehicle, causing it to flee in terror, speeding up to 47 miles or 76 kilometers an hour as you ride the wave of an eruption, causing you to burst out the side of Mount Prometheus itself, giving you an incredibly quick but impressive bird's eye view of the entire park. You next race around the perimeter of the mysterious island before slowing down and reaching the unload platform of the attraction, surviving your run-in with a lava monster and your heart-stopping 3-minute journey to the center of the Earth. Upon exiting the attraction, you are guided down a set of stairs and back into Mysterious Island, which, as the more astute of you may have noticed, means that your Terravator did in fact move, and it wasn't just some pre-show magic. However, instead of moving you down half a mile below the surface, it instead moved you up to the second floor of the attraction, where you load and unload from your ride vehicle. Journey to the Center of the Earth is the flagship attraction for the world's best theme park, and I believe it manages to live up to those grandiose expectations. It's the perfect mix of dark ride and thrill attraction, just like Tower of Terror at Disney's Hollywood Studios. While some guests will complain that the attraction is slightly too short, you'll struggle to find a guest that doesn't appreciate the intense, immersive theming and the world the attraction envelops you in.
Within arguably the best theme park in the world was an attraction that held a surprising comparison to the infamous extraterrestrial alien encounter, an attraction at Walt Disney World which was way too scary to share a home with rides such as Peter Pan's Flight and It's a Small World. Whilst this other attraction at Tokyo DisneySea was nowhere near as scary, both maintained a gritty realism within their experiences, broke boundaries with original concepts and ideas, were poorly marketed to guests, and have since been replaced with cutesy Disney characters. But the difference is that not many people have heard of Storm Rider. I'm lucky enough to have experienced this now defunct attraction, an experience which surprised me during my trip to Tokyo DisneySea in 2015. As a whole, it was a simulator on steroids, the next evolution of attractions such as Star Tours. But was it a worthy successor? Opening with the theme park on September 4th, 2001, Storm Rider was nestled at the back of Port Discovery, and whose show building made up much of the vista of the land. With copper roofs and mechanical oddities, the building was known as the Center for Weather Control and was themed to a futuristic early 20th century laboratory that blended perfectly with the other copper and brass structures around the land. Perhaps too perfectly. Port Discovery is basically the Tomorrowland of Tokyo DisneySea, even including an attraction called Aquatopia. But unlike most Tomorrowlands, it was and still is rather small, with Storm Rider being the only other ride in the land. Whilst the building gave off what could only be described as scientific noises, it unfortunately blended too well, and it wasn't entirely obvious that it was a feature attraction of the land. But once you waited in a brief outdoor queue, you were welcomed into the structure where your journey began. Inside continued the theme of retrofuturism with Jules Verne-inspired architecture and objects. At the back of the room was a giant radar which introduced a fierce incoming storm, and in the center sat a model of a strange device. Once guests were ushered into position, the pre-show would begin. A cast member would climb up onto the center catwalk and begin explaining the mission of Storm Rider. They introduced the veracity of storms and stated that the storm of the century was heading straight for Port Discovery. Thankfully, their research at the center provided them with a new piece of technology called a fuse, the strange model in the center of the room, which when activated in the eye of the storm would dissipate it, saving the area. This technology is transported on specially designed vehicles called Storm Riders, which allow you to withstand the sheer intensity of the storms. With alarms blaring, music swelling, and the stakes rising, guests are ushered to line up in rows ready to board their own Storm Riders. This pre-show is performed in an atrium at the center of the structure that houses Storm Rider as an attraction, and is flanked on its sides by 2 rows of doors that lead to the ride platforms themselves. This unique layout means that whilst the ride is in motion, the pre-show can be performed to get guests ready for their experience. From above, you can distinctly see the simple layout of this building, which features the central atrium and the two ride platforms parallel to each other on the side that are rather large. Unlike Star Tours, which only allows for 40 riders per vehicle, Storm Rider could accommodate 122 riders per platform, which makes it over 3 times the size of the Star Tour vehicles. Finally, the doors open to the Storm Riders, and guests are ushered in and take a seat. Similar to the rest of Port Discovery, the interior of Storm Rider is filled with circular portholes, brass and copper accents, with Victorian-inspired architecture. Once all guests are seated, secured, and checked, your Storm Rider is ready to depart. The ride begins with a large protective windshield cover opening at the front of the vehicle, revealing to guests that they are now hovering outside the hangar, awaiting clearance to take off behind another Storm Rider vehicle. This also reveals that the portholes flanking the guests are actually screens, which combined with clever lighting helps to sell the illusion that you're hovering in the sky. Clearance is given to the Storm Rider crafts, and now your flight is underway. You depart from Port Discovery after almost crashing into several boats, a strange act of intimidation from the vehicle's pilot, until you come upon Hydra 7, a floating city in the path of this intense storm, but you quickly ascend above it and into the storm itself. Whilst the projections featured within Storm Rider are not 3D, the screens combined with the platform's intense movements provides for a rather immersive and convincing experience. But it's yet to utilize some of the attraction's biggest strengths. Shortly after entering the storm, things begin to go wrong. The other Storm Rider vehicle is struck by lightning and sustains damage, forcing it to retreat and leaving you with the sole task of stopping the storm. Once you clear the outer rim of the storm and enter the eye, it's clear just how huge it is. But you need to go deeper to deploy the fuse and begin to plunge further inside. Darkness fills the cabin, whilst the winds pick up, bombarding the hull of the vehicle with debris and hail whilst being surrounded by ominous flashes of lightning. Thankfully, you're now ready to deploy the fuse to stop the storm. Lights flash within the Storm Rider, preparing it as it rockets out of the vehicle from just above the windshield. But suddenly, it's struck by lightning, forcing it off track as it starts hurling towards the craft, and in what is arguably the most exciting part of the attraction, the fuse pierces the hull of the Storm Rider and flies into the room with the guests whilst ominously counting down. This effect is just as simple as it is effective. Above the guests is what looks like a large tube. It's split into smaller segments along the roof, and the segment closest to the windshield actually spins. In its default position, the tube looks like a complete object, but when it spins, it reveals a large crack which allows the fuse to push on through. Considering that the hull has now been breached, the attraction simulates the damage done to the vehicle by blasting air from hidden fans onto the gas, combined with the random spraying of water to mimic rain. After being jostled about, the fuse begins to dislodge and scrapes out of the vehicle. But that's the least of your problems, as the fuse promptly explodes, causing even further damage, which is simulated through flickering around the vehicle with strobe lights, fiber optic effects, and the violent shaking of the cabin. This explosion pushes the Storm Rider down towards the ocean and back near Hydra 7, where it's struggling to stay in the air. Soaring past boats, dockyards, and buildings, the Storm Rider ends up on a head-on collision with one of the city's walls, but at the last moment manages to gain some height and clears the object. It's then revealed that the storm has begun to disappear, whether out of luck or from the fuse, we're not too sure, but the celebration is short-lived as the Storm Rider begins plunging down to the ocean and right near the other Storm Rider vehicle that was knocked out of the sky earlier. With a near miss, the vehicle plunges into the water, and as the Storm Rider begins to stabilize, the windshield starts closing to indicate that your thrilling adventure is now over. Sparks and flashing continue about the cabin as the cabin lights come on and the damage is far more evident. But that's not the guest's problem, as they're ushered out of the vehicle and back into Tokyo DisneySea. On May 17th, 2016, Storm Rider set out on its final journey. The attraction had unfortunately run its course and was due to be replaced with a Finding Nemo experience which would retrofit much of the ride's existing technology. It was an unfortunate decision, but one that needed to be made. During my visit to Tokyo DisneySea, whilst most of the park was experiencing waits above 1 hour, Storm Rider barely had any lines at all. Lacking a distinct and eye-catching weenie meant that the attraction blended in just far too much, and without an IP to get guests through the door, it was necessary to change the theme. Experiencing both iterations of the attraction, I can safely say that Storm Rider was the better experience. Sea Rider plays it too safe, and whilst it's obvious that the attraction is catering to children, something that DisneySea was lacking, you end up leaving the attraction with a feeling of, that's it? Watching videos of Storm Rider, you might wonder why anybody would like this attraction to begin with, but it was the combination of a carefully paced story, subtle 4D effects, surprising thrilling elements all on a large moving platform that really gave this attraction its edge. Perhaps it's the fact that the ride gave almost no expectations, but I found myself really enjoying this attraction, and it added to the DisneySea experience as a whole. Sinbad's Storybook Voyage opened alongside the rest of Tokyo DisneySea on September 4th, 2001. This underrated, slow-moving boat ride is the feature attraction of the park's Arabian coast, but despite the almost immediate success of Tokyo DisneySea, Sinbad has experienced a rather complicated journey, and at one stage was considered the black sheep of the park's attraction lineup. In contrast to Tokyo Disneyland, which centers around families, Tokyo DisneySea was designed to appeal to dating couples and older audiences, thus the emphasis on ports of call that feature a strong sense of adventure and romance, such as the Arabian coast. The original idea for this land's feature attraction was a boat ride with small puppet-sized characters that would follow all of the classic stories from the 1001 Nights collection of tales. But this multi-thousand-page story was deemed too impractical to adapt, understandably. So instead, Imagineers decided that the ride would center purely around Sinbad the Sailor, who was a relatively late addition to the 1001 Nights collection. Imagineer Larry Nicolai came on board as the attraction's show designer and art director. Sticking with the original boat ride through an elaborate puppet show theme, they ended up producing over 160 animatronic characters, and overall the attraction took 6 years to design, produce, and install. Unfortunately, trouble started almost immediately upon its completion. When the park opened on September 4, 2001, what was then known as the Sinbad's 7 Voyages ride looked very different from the Sinbad Storybook Voyage that you can experience today. In this original version, you follow the legendary Arabian sailor Sinbad and his crew as he sailed across the world, encountering many dangers, collecting many treasures, and doing the occasional dirty job. The attraction was dark, full of danger and drama, and failed to resonate with guests. One of the first problems was that the Imagineers working on the attraction had been told that the Japanese audience were familiar with the Arabian Nights tales. Upon completion, they were informed that they actually weren't, and that guests were confused about the attraction's storyline. The music used within the attraction was composed by Disney legend Buddy Baker, taking inspiration from Bernard Herrmann's cinematic scores. Likewise, this aroused criticism by Disney executives for being too dark and ponderous. Considering its position in the park at the furthest point from the entrance and its immense theoretical capacity at almost 3,600 riders per hour, the attraction almost never had a queue and was heavily underutilized. Despite DisneySea's overwhelming success, Sinbad was a clear black sheep amongst the flock, and redesign started shortly after its debut. After years of planning and a lengthy refurbishment, the attraction reopened in 2007. Now called Sinbad's Storybook Voyage, the attraction had a radical new lighthearted theme. Sinbad was no longer a daring thief facing perilous dangers, but a youthful adventurer with a heart of gold. The ride's dramatic soundtrack was replaced by an overarching song called The Compass of Your Heart, written by the famed Alan Menken, and highly recommend looking it up, it slaps. This song wasn't the only new addition to accompany Sinbad. Our protagonist now has a sidekick called Chandu, the tiger cub, who pops up many times throughout the attraction. Whilst adorable, Oriental Land Company, the park that licenses the Disney brand in Tokyo, knew exactly what they were doing with this brand new merchandising opportunity. Likewise, the original menacing and scary monsters were made to be friendly and assisted Sinbad through his journey instead of being obstacles that needed to be overcome. Also, Sinbad no longer has facial hair. Of course, this is because he's now a good guy. And because an OLC executive didn't like the beard in the first place. Unfortunately, the original Imagineer who worked on the attraction, Larry Nicolai, was removed from the project by OLC so that they could start again with a fresh new perspective on the attraction. Despite the changes, Larry Nicolai mentions that 80 to 85% of the attraction is the original design, but is so radically different in tone and presentation that it no longer represents the show that he put together as show designer and art director. Though he notes that a consolation was that many creative partners at Pixar deemed the original iteration their favorite attraction at Tokyo DisneySea, and they were surprised that they were changing it, a change that can still be experienced to this day. So let's have a look at that attraction. Guests enter Tokyo DisneySea's Arabian Coast port of call from one of two sides, where they are greeted by either a grand Arabian palace that wouldn't look out of place in the world of Aladdin, or a towering fortress home to Sinbad's storybook voyage. Entering this fortress, you are welcomed by a rather simplistic queue, featuring switchbacks and brick walls with paintings of scenes from the ride. In fairness, you're unlikely to ever have enough time to experience this queue, because as mentioned before, this ride has an astronomical theoretical hourly capacity of 3,600 guests. Sitting down into the large 24-person boat, you begin your storybook voyage. Sailing along, you first enter Sinbad's hometown, where you are introduced to the titular newly clean-shaven character and his aforementioned incredibly cute sidekick, Chandu, who is holding a map of the locations we're about to explore. This room is also where you're introduced to the absolute banger of a song that is Compass of Your Heart by famed Disney composer Alan Menken. The entire town has come out to wish Sinbad farewell and good luck. This initial scene alone tells you how incredible this ride is about to be. Everywhere you look, there's animatronics and storytelling. Right as you leave town, three bearded men tell you to beware. There are dangerous waters ahead, dangers that are much more apparent in the original version of the ride. Rounding the corner, you enter a dark, ominous, and stormy cavern. Initially in this room, Sinbad was nowhere to be seen, and instead, it featured sinister sirens playing an enchanting yet haunting song designed to lure sailors to their death. Today though, the sirens are now helpful mermaids who save Sinbad, who literally 10 seconds into the ride has already crashed and destroyed his first boat. After being provided with a new one, he thanks the mermaids and continues to sail and arrives at Rook Island. Originally, Rook Island is where Sinbad crashed his boat after being led astray by the sirens. Here he was holding aloft his stolen treasure as his crew were attempting to steal giant eggs from an understandably unhappy mythical rock bird. In the modern version though, the people trying to steal the eggs are now devious pirates. Pirates who get trapped and tied up by Sinbad and Chandu, which is probably a better fate than the one who is being held aloft by the rock's talons. Sinbad's next adventure involves a giant animatronic giant. Floating around, you enter a cavern filled with riches. Originally, Sinbad's crew were what can only be described as Scrooge McDuckin in the treasure, but they were spotted by the giant, who wasn't too happy with them using his treasure as a playground. His dissatisfaction could be seen as you continued and were greeted by one of the most impressive scenes in any dark ride, a full-sized giant animatronic holding aloft Sinbad's crew who dared to steal from him. This room has undergone some of the largest changes, with the giant now being trapped in a prison, with Sinbad saving him instead of stealing from him. But how does he get rewarded for this savior? By getting to sing a duet with the giant, singing with his impressively booming deep voice, whilst playing what we believe is a rebab, but could be from a wide variety of two-stringed quarterphones. We can't understate just how impressive this scene is, and the sheer scale of and proximity to this animatronic is unmatched in the world of theme parks. The next scene has probably changed the least between the two versions. Floating through a large entrance gate, you now enter in the Sultan's palace. Originally here, Sinbad was warned of more dangers ahead, whereas today, he's being gifted musical instruments so he can charm the monkeys from the next scene. These monkeys might just be the most terrifying part of the original ride, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was one of the main reasons this attraction got changed. Entering a cave, you are first greeted by the audible screeching of monkeys who aren't too happy to see you. Look, I'm just gonna let this part of the ride speak for itself. Thankfully, today the monkeys won't give you as many nightmares, as they instead are singing and dancing alongside with Sinbad, who has gifted them instruments and piles of bananas. Also, this room smells like bananas, which is a nice touch. Next, as if one giant animatronic wasn't enough for a ride, you are greeted by a room-filling whale that contains one of the largest hidden Mickeys in any theme park attraction. Originally, this whale wasn't happy to see you, and I'm starting to get the vibe that no one was really happy to see the original Sinbad, but had picked up and was threatening members of Sinbad's crew. The whale nowadays is much friendlier, and is giving Sinbad and Chandu a ride back home where an impressive celebration is awaiting them. This ride ends back where we began, but now at night, where in both versions Sinbad is being welcomed back to town with his newly founded treasures, with a fireworks display and party-like atmosphere. Right at the end, you are farewelled by Sinbad and Chandu, holding another map that hints at future voyages that they may take together. As you can see, the ride is about 85% the same between both versions, but by restaging and redressing animatronics and adding in Chandu, both rides feel entirely different. This is further compounded by having the earworm song drive you through the attraction, rather than traditional narration from Sinbad. No matter the version of the ride you have experienced though, it's clear that this ride is a masterclass from Imagineering. The scenes are so overwhelming and full of life that the sum of its parts combines into one of the most underrated attractions of all time. It's a shame this ride doesn't get much of a queue because it deserves one. It will be interesting to see how the queues for this ride go when Fantasy Springs finally opens, as it will go from being tucked away in a corner of the park to being right on the walkway to the hugely impressive new expansion.
On March 3rd, 1995, Indiana Jones' Adventure Temple of the Forbidden Eye premiered at Disneyland in California. With an estimated budget of $50 million or roughly $100 million today, it debuted as the most advanced amusement attraction ever built. The ride spanned 2 stories in an insane 50,000 square foot show building, with the queue alone being half a mile long, as it needed to traverse beneath the existing Disneyland Railroad. The attraction was insanely ambitious, but it was worth it, as upon opening it was considered an immediate success. Many praised the ride's sheer scale, immersive environment, enhanced effects, and its one-of-a-kind innovative ride system, the Enhanced Motion Vehicle, or EMV for short. Despite everything else the attraction did right, the EMV was the crown jewel of Indiana Jones' Adventure. This new system married a motion platform similar to Star Tours with a slot car. This allows the vehicle to self-propel itself through the attraction, whilst the motion base simulates enhanced movement, such as driving over rough terrain or banking through a turn, thus the name Enhanced Motion Vehicle. If you are interested in this ride system, we explore it in much greater detail in a previous video. When the Indiana Jones Adventure opened, Tokyo DisneySea was just around the corner. And with the success of the ride, it made sense for Walt Disney Imagineering to build a second version of this ambitious attraction within an equally ambitious park. But this might not have always been the case. Plans for a second gate in Tokyo were first conceived in 1987. It was initially meant to be similar to Disney MGM Studios, with the very succinct and creative name of Disney Hollywood Studio Theme Park at Tokyo Disneyland. Plans for this park were later scrapped in 1992, and it was rumored that this was due to Oriental Land Company officials, the licensee and owner of Tokyo Disneyland, being largely unimpressed with Disney MGM Studios. OLC didn't want something different. They wanted Tokyo Disneyland 2.0, which is ultimately what Tokyo DisneySea would become. Instead of a castle, you have Mount Prometheus. Tomorrowland became Port Discovery. Small World is Sinbad, and so on. What better place to call the next Indiana Jones adventure ride home than what was essentially Disneyland 2.0? However, the owners of the Oriental Land Company gave Disney an ultimatum. This version of the ride must be more reliable than the Disneyland original. This new Indiana Jones adventure opened its doors alongside DisneySea on September 4th, 2001. The attraction had some key differences to the original though, with the most obvious being a name change to Indiana Jones Adventure, Temple of the Crystal Skull. These changes would largely make sense given the transition to a Japanese market. When constructing the ride for Tokyo, they decided that Disneyland's Indiana Jones ride setting of Asia wasn't exotic enough for the Japanese guests. Instead, the entire Central American land of Lost River Delta was created to give the ride a new home, which married better with DisneySea's usage of ports of call instead of lands. Lost River Delta is a dated settlement situated at the fringes of an ever-advancing rainforest. Here, renowned archaeologist Indiana Jones has discovered an ancient Aztec pyramid that he believes is the resting location of the legendary Fountain of Youth. But Indy has reported back that the temple is filled with booby traps and skeletal remains of those who have befallen them. His Central American assistant Peiko, though, has completely disregarded this warning and is now offering Peiko's temple tours, where he will take guests deep into the pyramid via his fleet of jungle jeeps. And you are about to undertake one of these tours. Entering the land, you are instantly drawn to this pyramid. Rather than trying to hide the facade and show building as they do in Anaheim, here they make it large and imposing, drawing you in. Walking towards the temple, you enter not where you might expect, as you first walk quite far to the right of the temple where the queue begins. Weaving your way through thick foliage, you soon find yourself inside the Temple of the Crystal Skull, which has no relation to the fourth Indiana Jones film, with this ride opening 7 years before that film would debut. Once in, you are greeted by an active archaeological dig site inside an impressively large central chamber. You have now worked your way inside the temple pyramid you saw earlier. Similar to the Californian attraction, the scale of this queue alone at DisneySea is truly impressive. Electrical lights strung together haphazardly flicker as you make your way through the temple. Weaving your way up the scaffolding, you start to see paintings depicting the crystal skull, warning you of the risky journey ahead. From the main chamber, you venture into a cylindrical antechamber, where to the left is a golden medallion flanked by small windows, and on the right is a huge map. From time to time, light flickers through one of these windows, reflecting onto the golden medallion, which in turn shoots a pinpoint onto the map on the far wall, with the point on the map being a direct reference to Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones film. You continue your journey through catacombs as you venture deeper and deeper into the temple, where you eventually arrive at a screening room. After watching the safety film, you move into a load station that will look quite familiar to those of you who have ridden the California version of this ride. Pulling up next to you is a Jeep that looks identical to its Cali counterpart, but there are some key differences. The earlier version of the EMV used oil hydraulics, which would regularly spring leaks and require lengthy cleanups. This new version uses electric motors and air pneumatics to solve that problem. This starts an overall theme for this iteration. as it's clear that Tokyo learned from the problems that eventually plagued the Californian attraction's more ambitious editions after opening. Oriental Land Company didn't want ambition, they wanted reliability. This means that journeying through the ride, you will notice the abundant similarities and differences between the original and the Tokyo DisneySea version of this ride. We're not going to point out every single one, but see how many differences you can spot if you're familiar with the original. After buckling up and securing your loose belongings, the ride starts with you racing around the corner, where you find yourself in the Chamber of Purity, where ancient explorers were said to bathe and cleanse themselves before heading further into the temple. The doors swing open to reveal the crystal skull itself, and Peiko warns you to sneak by, as you don't want to disturb it. But disturb it, you do, as the skull begins to unleash its supernatural powers, glowing and shooting out beams of light from its eyes. Speeding away, you start heading towards the now opened gates of doom, where you are met by Indy, attempting to keep the doors closed. Whipping to the left, you enter the main chamber of the ride. A swirling vortex sits in front of you, and a giant skull is guarding this cavernous chamber. Heading back into a side cavity, you weave past skeletons and skulls before being plunged into darkness, with only your headlights left to illuminate the countless bugs crawling across the walls. In front of you lies a precarious bridge. As you cross it, the skull shoots lasers from its eyes, attempting to hit you, leaving the bridge swinging and swaying. Barely making it across, you are truly left on your own, as you come face to face with a giant embodiment of the Mesoamerican feathered serpent deity. Narrowly escaping this serpent, you enter the giant skull and find a shrine inside, where another angered crystal skull screams at you. You enter a further pitch black room where suddenly a large stone-carved face comes into view. Angered by your presence, he shoots out a huge smoke ring towards the ride vehicle, which hits you dead on. Your Jeep then comes to a complete stop as you notice the carved stone heads on the walls have dart tubes pointed directly at you. Your Jeep roars to life and bypasses them before being greeted by the ride's big, familiar finale. Hanging from the roof, you see Indy himself, and before long, he is joined by a large boulder that comes rolling towards you. It barely misses you as you crash through the floor, where you see Indy for the final time, safe and sound, bidding us farewell as we enter the unload station, where you jump off and can buy your on-ride photo of the moment you almost got crushed by a giant rolling rock. While a lot of the scenes are similar to that in Anaheim, they all feature fully fledged set pieces rather than simply painted flat walls. On paper, this version sounds like the ultimate version of this ride, but in making it more reliable, they remove some of the effects that truly made it incredible. While the swirling vortex is fine, it doesn't hold a candle to Mara shooting lasers out of her eyes and setting off fireballs. And to some, the blue hues of the ride don't quite emit the same level of excitement and adventure as the reds and oranges of the original. Ultimately though, this ride is still a genuine marvel of Imagineering, but in a spectacular park like DisneySea, it's often forgotten about by people who have ridden and enjoyed the original. The Tokyo Disney Resort is known for its extraordinary ability to take the beloved and familiar and reimagine it in a way that is totally new, fresh, and utterly spectacular. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at Tokyo DisneySea is no exception. Located within the park's iconic mysterious island, this intricate dark ride opened with the park back in September of 2001. And despite sharing a name with other Disney rides around the world, in true DisneySea fashion, this version is so much more than what came before it. The Disney parks have a long history of adapting this iconic Jules Verne novel that goes all the way back to the days of Walt Disney. The first attraction related to the novel would open just a month after Disneyland did, when the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit opened in Tomorrowland, giving guests the chance to walk through and admire props and sets from the 1954 film of the same name. 4 years later, in 1959, Disneyland embarked on an ambitious expansion of Tomorrowland, which included 3 new attractions: the Matterhorn bobsleds, the Disneyland monorail, and the submarine voyage, paving the way for the grandest 20,000 Leagues attraction ever to be built. This aptly named submarine voyage was commissioned in front of Walt Disney with his wife Lillian in attendance, along with President Richard Nixon and officers of the US Navy. Not yet themed to Jules Verne, the attraction used early animatronics and forced perspective to simulate a deep-sea environment. Guests would descend into large grey submarines via a staircase and observe their outside underwater environment through large glass windows. Despite the appearance, guests were only a foot underwater and were essentially just inside fancy boats on a track. The attraction made clever use of bubble jets in a hidden show building behind a rockwork facade to give the impression that they were much deeper underwater than they actually were. The experience proved to be extremely popular with guests, and with the forthcoming Florida project on the horizon, Walt Disney Imagineering got to work planning an even more elaborate iteration for what would become the Magic Kingdom. On October 14, 1971, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea submarine voyage opened at the Magic Kingdom. Despite being externally themed around the Jules Verne novel and the classic Disney film, the ride experience was very similar to its Californian counterpart. Guests would climb down a staircase into a submarine where Captain Nemo from the classic story would showcase the underwater depths, divers, the North Pole, and the ruins of Atlantis. While this attraction was a guest favorite, it was expensive to maintain and had a relatively low hourly capacity, so an advertised temporary closure on September 5th, 1994 would become a permanent one, and the ride would never open again. The Oriental Land Company, the owners of Tokyo Disneyland, wanted a version of this attraction for their upcoming sea-based second theme park. But at Disney's warning, this new version wouldn't take you under the sea at all. And to save on the expensive upkeep of underwater ride systems, show scenes and animatronics, this new version would be a suspended dark ride, similar to Peter Pan's Flight. However, guests still needed to be convinced that they were sea-bound. So via clever water tanks and bubble systems built into the ride's viewing windows, guests were convinced that they had dived below the ocean. An effect that we can't undersell just how effective it is. You are even further convinced by the load and unload station for the ride being above a bubbling pool of water. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea takes place in one of, if not the most immersive theme park land in the world, Mysterious Island. Set in the 1870s on an uncharted island somewhere in the South Pacific, a giant volcano has risen from the depths. This is the secret base of operations for Captain Nemo himself, a man wishing to explore both the depths of the sea and the earth. Captain Nemo has invited the world's scientific community to visit him and share in his discoveries at Mysterious Island, and you are among them. The land is home to 2 attractions: the groundbreaking Journey to the Center of the Earth, the ride that puts this park on the map for a lot of people, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a ride that would be a headliner at any other Disney park, but often feels forgotten about at DisneySea. Captain Nemo has personally invited you as explorers and adventurers to board one of his submarines to research and enjoy the majesty of the ocean. To begin this adventure, you start by weaving down a spiral ramp and past Nemo's own mini-sub, giving guests a glimpse of the upcoming ride vehicle. Across the way as you get closer to the water's edge, you can spot Nemo's much larger submarine, the Nautilus, bubbling away on the other side of the lagoon. Once down into the cavern of the island, you bypass Captain Nemo's private study and control panel, where you discover that the captain is working in another part of the facility. Throughout this section, there are plenty of notes, maps, and research materials for you to view and read whilst you wait in the queue. Here, you are also introduced to one of Captain Nemo's newest inventions, the Aquaphone, a wireless communication device that allows him to monitor activities throughout Mysterious Island and broadcast anything he discovers to his fleet of underwater research submarines. Further throughout the queue, you pass the dive hatch area, noting missing diving suits, before entering the submarine docking port. Here, hanging from the roof via a large hook, is the submersible you're about to travel 20,000 leagues under the sea in. That's 96,560 kilometers for us metric folk. Guests board the 6-person ride vehicles, and the conveyor belt moves them to the water's edge, ready to be dropped in and begin their dive. Upon release from the hook, you immediately make your way to the depths. Captain Nemo speaks over the aquaphone, welcoming you as his volunteer crew. As you hit the ocean floor, you can first observe the beauty of an ocean reef surrounding Mysterious Island. But Captain Nemo warns you to be on the lookout for highly intelligent beings that live underwater. Once you hear the bell, an interactive element of the ride begins, where a joystick in front of you controls a searchlight, allowing you to look around and light up the deep, dark depths. Guests are then reminded that the ocean is a vast and wondrous place, not controlled by man, as they traverse a graveyard of sunken and lost ships, some in the middle of celebrating a New Year's Eve party. No matter the power and riches these people may have had, these vessels were destined to become junk at the bottom of the sea, a playground for critters of the deep that can be spotted via your searchlight. But you have little time to reflect on these lost ships, as turning the corner you are greeted by a piercing eyeball, belonging to a sea creature of mammoth proportions. Nemo warns you to approach slowly and carefully, but the creature's eye lights up red as his full body and tentacles come into view. You are being attacked by a giant squid. The defense system is activated and the tentacles begin to be electrocuted, but the squid traps your submarine, barely escaping with one final shock. But now, there's another issue. The defense system has drained your sub of more power than it should have, and you start to descend further and further into the water. Down at these new depths, you start to see evidence of a long-lost civilization. Murals and crumbling structures suggest you are not the only people in this place. Before long, you start to notice eyeballs peering back at you, watching from afar. But power is still an issue, and although the backup generator has kicked in, it too is almost out of energy, and oxygen levels are getting dangerous low. As energy levels are set to their minimum, more and more aquatic creatures seem to be investigating your visitation. Unlike the creatures you saw in the sunken shipyard though, these new ones seem to be humanoid in shape and evolved for their aqueous home. Soon these creatures emerge from the ruins of the lost city of Atlantis and save you and your crew, pushing you up and out of the depths as they wave a final goodbye before you arrive at the unload area, safe and sound. The tricks used in this ride to make you really feel underwater show the ingenious of Imagineering, down to the Atlantean animatronics having this flow about them that truly makes them look like they are swimming, especially when you compare this to a ride like The Little Mermaid, which never quite achieves that effect realistically. Unlike the submarines featured at other Disney parks around the world, guests never actually go underwater within this attraction. Instead, they use the windows of the ride vehicle to simulate the effects in a surprisingly simple manner. The undersea effect is mostly achieved using 2 layers of glass with a layer of water in between them. This layer of water achieves 2 effects that really help sell the undersea nature of the ride. First, it helps simulate the distortion typically seen when underwater, and secondly, it cleverly contains an air pump that allows bubbles to rise through the glass at specified times to simulate diving and being underwater. The overhead rail system used for this ride is also surprisingly intricate and robust for what seems like a simple attraction at first glance. Suspending the ride vehicle above the ground allows for the submarines to realistically glide above the seafloor, but it does lead to some awkwardness if you ever need to evacuate, having to ascend a ladder to the catwalks above the attraction where you follow a cast member to the nearest emergency exit. People often forget about this ride when talking about Tokyo DisneySea, but we think it's a triumph, taking an older idea and bringing it up to modern standards with modern tricks and effects. So if you ever make it over to Tokyo Disney Resort, don't miss 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Also make sure once you've enjoyed your deep sea exploration, drop by the nearby Nautilus Galley to pick up the famed gyoza dog. For Review Time, I'm Luke. Thanks for watching.